More than ever, students expect their college degrees to pay off with strong career prospects. Yet with the needs of the job market and what a career path even means in the 21st century continues to quickly change. One of the biggest challenges for institutions is keeping up with the latest technology skills that new graduates acquire depending on their field of study. Today, as part of that larger question, we'll be talking about the efforts to upskill adult learners, the possible structural changes colleges are making to better meet the needs of their workforce, and the employer partnerships they are deepening to better understand how the curriculum and academic programs must evolve as tech changes. Hello, everyone. I'm Ian Wilhelm, an editor with the Chronicle. I'll be your moderator for this session today. We've got a great panel to help us navigate these issues, and I hope to hear from you as well. Please do use the Q&A to let me know what you'd like to hear from the panel, and also share your own opinions and advice in the Q&A as well. We all benefit when it's a robust conversation during a session like this. And I will say that the Q&A is a great resources for us at the Chronicle to hear about what higher ed is talking about. So please don't be shy. Let us know what you're thinking about on this topic and what questions you'd like the panel to answer. Now, before we get started with the panel discussion, I want to thank the underwriter for today's session. That's Cambridge University Press. I appreciate their support for this virtual discussion. As part of Cambridge's support, halfway through today's session, I'm going to invite my colleague, Liz McMillan, who's the Chronicle's executive editor, to join. Liz will interview John Ricketts, a professor of agricultural education at Tennessee State University. They'll talk for about 5 to 8 minutes about the topic today, and then we'll kick it back to the panel discussion, and we'll close out the session at 3 o'clock East Coast time. Now, without further ado, let me introduce the panel, alphabetical order by last name. First is Lauren Anderson, University Associate Provost of Careers and Industry Partnerships at the City University of New York. Lauren, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
Next is Khushro Kitwai, an Associate Dean for Lifelong Learning at the Whitting School of Engineering at Johns Hopkins University. Khushro, thanks for being here as well.
Thank you, Ian. My pleasure as well. Thanks.
And then we have Ian Rourke, who's Vice Chancellor of Workforce Development and Innovation at Pima Community College. Ian, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thanks to the Chronicle for allowing Pima to be present.
Yeah, of course. I want to get started here and start this conversation. I mentioned some institutional structures. What I mean by that is sort of new roles potentially as you look out to the workforce and you try to adapt to it as quickly as possible, especially around some of these tech skills I want to get into over time. Lauren and Khushro, you both sit in roles that are recently created by your institutions to better connect students with career opportunities and to think more about how you think about the changing world of work with the curriculum as well. I'm going to start there just to make sure folks know where you're kind of speaking from in terms of those roles and what they may indicate broadly in terms of trends in higher ed. So Lauren, could you talk a bit about what your role is and kind of what gap it's trying to fill at CUNY?
Sure. The University Associate Provost role for Careers and Industry Partnerships is a role that was created about 1.5 years ago to oversee and shepherd all of the university's work to ensure that our graduates, whether they're in our non-degree or our degree programs, can more quickly connect to careers of their choosing at salaries that are competitive, and also to make sure that we are helping businesses in New York grow inclusively, with the idea that if a university helps businesses to grow, there will be more job opportunities for students to enter careers. And the creation of this role, which sits on the Chancellor's Cabinet and also the Provost's Cabinet, reporting to both, is that we are reflecting the fact that career success for our graduates is a primary priority for the university system. The City University of New York, which is, for those of you who don't know, 25 colleges, 7 community colleges, 11 senior colleges that grant bachelor's institutions, and the remainder are professional and graduate schools. We were created about 175 years ago and are known across the nation for our work to propel students from lower classes into the middle class. But even though career success has always been part of our DNA, it has never been prioritized at the senior-most levels of the university system. And it reflects the fact that this career outcomes are a growing area of focus for colleges nationwide because our students are demanding it. They really are coming to school to know that it's going to provide a pathway for them to move into the careers that they want. And so the fact that this work is now on the Chancellor's Cabinet, on the Provost's Cabinet, is a reflection of the fact that it has to be integrated into everything we do, both on the operations side and on the academic side.
Well, I appreciate that brief recap of all that you're doing there, which is a lot. And it is sort of interesting. Again, I think it is reflective of folks trying to be a little bit better in terms of meeting what the changing needs of the workforce are and changing needs of the world of work. Khushro, could you talk a little bit about your role? It's a little bit of a different spot since you're focused on these questions about lifelong learning, potentially upskilling within the Whitting School there. Can you talk a little bit about why your role was created and what you hope to accomplish?
Yes, and thanks, Ian. And indeed, the big picture vision might be similar to Lauren's, but the context is perhaps even more focused for us. I am at the Whiting School of Engineering, and as we say regularly and note regularly, the state of the art in the engineering and technology space is changing much faster still than every other domain. And as such, the need for upskilling is even more intense and in your face, so to speak, especially if you factor in the AI phenomena that is playing itself out. That's number one. Number two, another sort of pertinent aspect of our context is the fact that the Whiting School of Engineering has had a robust and flourishing for credit portfolio for working professionals, over 23 master's degrees, 6,000 students over 6 decades since 2002, much of it online and so on and so forth. So for us, really, it was a no-brainer to start to think about responding to signals that we were getting over really multiple years. And quite frankly, there is now that we have launched 3 years ago, there is a realization regularly that we should have done this sooner. But in any case, we have launched, and a couple of things, if I may just put on the table in terms of our early, experience in this space. One, as one would expect, the make it and they build it and they will come. That quite didn't play out for us. We launched in the open enrollment B2C world. That space has gotten saturated. There's a lot of high quality content on the internet available for low cost and no cost, if you will, if you look at YouTube and so on. Plus the fact that there are many more players coming in, there is what I call the squeeze. The prices are dropping, the cost of acquiring a learner is increasing. And that really was a reality that we were born in, if you will. It took us a few months to realize that reality, but we have pivoted to B2B, direct partnerships with the federal government, Department of Defense, corporate entities, local and regional, and I'd like to sort of speak more about that in this conversation as we go. But back to you, Ian, for now. Thanks.
Yeah, Krisha, a lot to dig in there, and I appreciate the landscape you said that you're coming into, which is complicated from everything from different online providers that have come to this space when you're providing certain skills, certainly tech skills, but also, as you said, things like YouTube that are sometimes students are looking for some of those things too. So it's a very complicated environment, the higher education landscape than it was in years past. Ian, I want to dig into some of those things that Krisha just mentioned in terms of partnerships. But before I get there, I just want to hear you reflect a little bit. If you have any comments about the sort of the structural changes. Obviously, community colleges have been a place where a lot of thought is going in to make sure that graduates are leading with the right skills, the right technology skills and other skills for the workforce today. I just wonder, from your perspective, how is that changing? I know it's a big question, but for you at Pima, how are you thinking about structurally, perhaps a little bit about some of the things that both Lauren and Krisha had mentioned in terms of the changes they've made in terms of what their roles reflect, and if you at Pima have thought about similar things?
Sure, Ian. Being a workforce development practitioner for now almost 2 decades, is exciting to see that the importance and prominence of workforce development is growing at all types of institutions, whether they're small local community colleges, large community college districts like Pima, or regional and state universities and other entities as well. For Pima Community College, I've been here for 8 years. I was the first and still am the then vice president of workforce development and now vice chancellor of workforce development and innovation. The core of my office and my teams that report up through our area has really remained central, and that is to help align the college district, either at the program level or at the strategy level, meet the needs of business and industry in a workforce development context. But that's not where it ends. Workforce development really speaks to the needs of business and industry as it currently exists within our communities, which is the result of economic development priorities of the past. We also are aligning to meet the needs of business and industry in an economic development context. So we're working hand in hand with our local state governments, our economic development organizations, to not only develop the programs that business and industry needs now, but to help prepare the workforce for large-scale business attraction efforts across Tucson and Southern Arizona. And those efforts have really started to play out with great success, with a number of companies launching or announcing their presence here, building their factories, particularly in manufacturing, whereas in 2015, we weren't known as a manufacturing hub, but in preparation for large-scale business attraction in manufacturing, particularly in aerospace and defense, or in electric vehicle and battery manufacturing. We planned large-scale manufacturing programs and the facilities and training equipment to meet those needs. And now we're seeing that companies are selecting Southern Arizona because there is the workforce development capacity here. And that's just one example of that economic development approach. It's very exciting to have support from our chancellor and how we are structured. So we aren't just a messenger with business and industry. Our area has convening authority and power within the institution to work with faculty and deans to develop the programs of study, whether they're short-term, not-for-credit offerings, all the way up to new certificates and degrees to meet the needs of business and industry, and ensure that there are continuous feedback loops with our business and industry partners to gauge how well we're aligned. And so it's a very exciting time for that sort of work.
That's a great note to get on, Ian, in terms of how you're working with those deans and the faculty, kind of taking from, hey, you talked about the big sort of workforce development issues or where you want to head, but let's start talking a little bit more specifically. And while keeping it somewhat big picture, Ian, I was going to stick with you and talk about partnerships with employers, something you do in a vast area. But I want to talk a little bit about just teaching the skills and keeping up with the skills that are required by technology. And because, as institutions, higher education institutions are traditionally small c conservative, they don't move as quickly. I think you all are assigned in some ways of trying to move more quickly with the workforce needs, and especially around technology, which obviously is moving so quickly. None of you need to know that. I need to be told that. And crucial, I'll give you the shout out for the first person mentions AI. This is obviously the thing that's roiling a lot of different industries. So back to my question, Ian. Partnerships, how do you kind of work with employers? Are there examples when it comes to making sure that you're teaching, that your curriculum has what it needs to teach when it comes to some of the technology skills, where it seems to be probably one of the areas that rapidly changes the most quickly?
Yes, first, with respect to partnerships, it's important to be engaged and have your hand out with an attitude of we're going to work together to find a way to say yes, but also having that important parameter of we're not going to overpromise and underdeliver. So we have to be well-versed with respect to what our capacity is in each and every single one of our programs of study, whether it's laboratory equipment, faculty depth, skill, and expertise, but always engaging employer partners with we need to work together to find a way to yes. And it can't be about the college alone. So we partner, as I'd mentioned already, with our economic development organizations, but equally with a large number of community-based organizations, and I think most importantly, the public workforce system, which is called Arizona at Work Pima County here in Southern Arizona, to ensure that when we're approaching employer partnerships, we bring every resource available to the community within the community possible to meet that workforce need for the employer, and to ensure that people in our community who we serve are aware of these excellent job opportunities in these growing technological fields in Tucson, and that there's a place they know that there's a place they can go to get the requisite skill set to get those jobs. So how we're structured is we're engaged with business and industry, whether they're small businesses all the way up to the large entities in our community at every level, whether that's at the C-suite all the way down to managers. And it's also important for colleges to be engaged twofold with respect to companies, the human resources area of the company, as well as the actual management and also labor on the floor, for example, in manufacturing, because oftentimes when you're trying to develop a program of study to meet a sector's needs or particular business needs. If you're only talking to the human resources department, or you're only talking to the folks on the factory floor, you're missing the bigger picture of how to design those programs to meet the business interest of the business, but also the workers' needs on the floor and the management therein. Right now, we have over 700 documented employer partnerships within Southern Arizona all the way to national. And we actually have categorized those into 3 different levels of engagement. And our goal now is to not just to keep adding to the number of employer partnerships that we have, but to increase the quality of those partnerships and really going into a deeper dive with respect to business and industry about how to help them get the talent that they need in a highly competitive environment, and really what their role is in addition to what the college's role is with respect to incentivizing the workforce to go to their particular job opportunity or their particular company. So we work a lot with apprenticeship, other forms of work-based learning, as well as tuition reimbursement schema, so that we can leverage all facets of available resources for employers and for people in the community to fill those talent needs. The role of the faculty in all of this is essential. They are our subject matter experts, whereas many of the individuals on the workforce development team, including myself, come from a diverse set of backgrounds. And our role is to really build partnerships and to build types of programs such as PIMA Fast Track for short-term training or customized training or new certificates and degrees. The subject matter experts, our faculty, are the ones that have the depth and breadth needed to do that deep dive with respect to developing curricula to meet industry's needs. So it's very important that our business and industry advisory committees are well populated with experts from industry, and that our faculty are engaged with those individuals, and equally that we are giving our faculty the resources and the time they need to either have externships or other sorts of professional development. I'll give one example in the applied technology space and in an IT space. We are a part of the National Coalition of Certification Centers, or NC3 for short, and we have found that in the applied technology space and in IT, that professional development is excellent. And our faculty members have reported that it's some of the best applied technology professional development that they get. So we make sure that we have in our budget both the time and the money set aside for faculty training so that they can maintain currency in these rapidly changing fields.
Yeah, I imagine that's changing. Again, quickly changing, making sure that they are thinking about what's happening and so they can bring it into the classroom and bring it into the course design, I imagine is key in those areas. Lauren, I was going to bring you in and to this conversation. Obviously, we could talk a lot about different types of partnerships, but one program in particular I thought was interesting that you all work at CUNY is the Tech in Residence Core. Could you talk a little bit about that? Obviously, reflecting on anything that Ian had to say too, but I would love to hear a little bit about that and how that's bringing some of these technology skills as they develop in almost real time, if you will, in the New York area, into your classroom, arguably, onto your campuses.
Sure, absolutely. So just for context, the Tech in Residence Corps is a program that was established in 2017 here at the City University of New York, and it recruits industry professionals from companies in New York City, the folks you'd expect, Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, all of those sort of FANG and high-tech companies, to those that you wouldn't, like cutting-edge startups that are just starting here in New York, a lot of fintech startups, et cetera, that kind of have an interplay between various disciplines, and then some folks from other sectors that you wouldn't even imagine as being tech sectors. Like we have the head of security for Chobani, a yogurt company, because it's really important to protect your proprietary yogurt secrets. But what we have found is that by bringing those industry professionals into the classroom, originally, faculty really enjoyed it, our campuses really enjoyed it because it solved an issue of capacity, not having enough faculty to actually staff all of the courses in rapidly evolving fields that we know are in demand in New York City. And chairs needed that help. They needed industry professionals to come in and help teach some of those classes. But what we found is that what wound up happening is department chairs not only saw that as an added capacity, they started learning the language of industry, and industry likewise started learning the language of our faculty. And from that initial sense of how do we bring in an adjunct to teach a specific course, that really has evolved over time to our industry professionals sitting on faculty committees and our industry professionals helping department chairs transition those one-time elective courses into the regular curriculum. I know Mark in our audience had a question about how to use industry input to inform all levels of degrees. We're really seeing that happening beyond just the one classroom that our industry professionals are helping to teach in. But the truth is that, the industry professionals who are coming into the classroom also are not professionals when it comes to how to teach basic tech concepts. And so they need to work together with faculty to understand and have a mentor who can teach them along the way for things that help them understand how to tie it back to other concepts students are teaching, and also to help them understand how to navigate a classroom, how to navigate students. So we are really proud of that program. It has been really successful so far and has helped to bridge sort of a gap in language that sometimes exists between industry and faculty.
Interesting in terms of the gap in language, but I also like the idea of the two-way communication there, that it's not just the expert in, say, technology in this case coming in and saying, hey, here's exactly what you have to teach, here's how you teach it. It's, perhaps some mentoring there going from the faculty side too, in terms of, hey, here's how we teach, how we think. Because I do think I get, when we have these conversations about the emerging tech skills, and I've been emphasizing how rapidly they change, you're focused on only the things that are emerging at this time and or even some years ahead. You may miss some of those basic skills that so many students still need, because we do hear that from faculty sometimes about, hey, we feel like that some skills that are missing when it comes to technology for students as well. And so again, kind of making sure that those industry experts come in and understand that as well seems important, potentially too. Kusho, I want to give it to Lauren, go ahead. Looks like you're about to respond.
No, I was just going to say that's exactly right. A lot of our industry professionals who teach recognize that what they're teaching might be irrelevant in 5 years. And so in addition to reinforcing sort of how do the foundational skills you're learning in your other courses really give you a solid basis on which you can evolve over time as jobs change, the other thing that the industry professionals are bringing into the classroom is applied experience, connection to what it's like to actually be in a workplace, which if you're at a school system that serves students who are majority low income, majority first in their family to go to college, that's a really helpful benefit too, is to build that professional network. So there are ancillary benefits as well.
I appreciate that, Lauren. Kusho, I want to bring you back into the conversation. Obviously, you're working in an area which is focused on adult learners, on non-degree, and in a very specific discipline area. But I'm wondering how you think about this, keeping up with what the needs technology-wise are within the space that you're looking at. And because I think upskilling and reskilling, these terms that we are becoming more often, and as we think about where the economy is going, where we are going technologically, all the changes in the job market, it's becoming more and more important to make sure you're keeping up to speed. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that your faculty are thinking about that too?
Absolutely. And in fact, in my response, I might come back to a couple of points that Ian made earlier. Very impressive, Ian, 700 relationships. Of course, I'll have to learn more about you, and I'll ping you separately. But the one of the points in that conversation was, how do we discern what the industry is looking for? In fact, one of the unique aspects of this dynamic, the B2B partnership, is that you can actually have conversations with the 2B learners. You can meet with them, speak with them, and learn what is it that they are looking to gain. You can meet with their talent leads, HR folks, and ask them what is their vision for their employees that they're going to send to us. We are at the moment hosting 20 C-suite leaders, executives from a 2,000 odd firm that is playing in data analytics and AI space. We met to prep for this 4-day course, four-day courses, if you will, with them. We met with their VP for talent development. We learned from them what they're looking for, and we co-created the curriculum, if you will. It's bringing together of the client, our faculty, and we are, if you will, sort of the hosts of those conversations and the facilitators. We bring resources to bear to bring the best that our institution can bring to the table to meet this industry's needs. And that's where another point that Ian mentioned earlier, quantity versus quality. Quality is an aspect that we are, as a startup, we have really paid strong attention to. We have few partnerships, but we've set them up as exemplars, if you will. And in doing so, we are sort of learning if there is an appetite to scale, which there is, how would we scale it? What would be the model to in terms of resources to scale? So I think starting with quality first has allowed us to look at how we can go beyond. And I'll make one final point, and this was an interesting conversation I had not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, with a consulting firm, a consulting firm, and that was around. They were asking me, so what do you see as your competition? And I thought for it for a moment, and I was hard pressed to really come up with a response. And what I'm signaling here, and again going back to both Lauren and Ian, this dynamic is about relationships with clients, and we are limited by our capacity to build and forge those relationships, to discern, sit down with firms to discern what their upskilling needs are. And if we can do that well, and if we can produce at our end well, I think there isn't really the kind of competition you look for in the open enrollment, where digital marketing, you're fighting for a click and so on and so forth. Here, this is sort of a very different landscape, and a fascinating opportunity for higher education, for one, to make an impact. Back to you, Ian.
I think so, sure. I appreciate that. I'm going to remind folks we're going to pause here in a second to bring in my colleague Liz McMillan to talk with John Ricketts, but I do want to launch a poll here, actually really two polls, asking the audience a question here about how they feel like they're developing the skills for the workforce of the future, primarily thinking about those workforce skills as being very focused on technology, obviously, and how you're building into your curriculum and into your course design. So I'm gonna leave that open for a little bit, see what answers you have. Feel free to let me know in the Q&A what examples you have, where the barriers are, where the opportunities you are, and I'll be looking at that as well. I'm gonna plan to weave in a little bit more of those questions from the audience in the second half of the conversation today. I'm gonna remind my panelists now to turn off their video and go on mute for a few minutes, as I said. Now, as part of our collaboration with Cambridge University Press, which again is the sponsor for today, I'm going to turn it over to Liz McMillan, again, the Chronicle's executive editor, and she'll be talking with John Ricketts, professor of agricultural education at Tennessee State University. And I really appreciate it. Liz, over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Ian. And I want to welcome John onto the screen. As Ian said, John is a professor of agricultural education at Tennessee State University, and he partnered with Cambridge as a result of some special USDA funding in response to COVID-19. And he's here to tell us a bit about the courses he developed. So please tell us more, John.
Sure. So I'm happy to be part of the discussion today. I've enjoyed all of the talks so far. And what we did was very related to the discussion today. In order to workforce development is a need for workforce literacy. And so a lot of our students in agriculture rely heavily on secondary agricultural education. And what happened was when COVID came, everyone was sent home, and there's quite a few resources out there for online instruction, but not necessarily for our unique field with lots of technical pieces like agricultural education. So we got a USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture grant to develop courses, really one course in each pathway. And the genesis of the project was to develop online resources for that upper division high school student. And it happened to keep the relevance of the program. We actually are using those courses for dual enrollment. That's another discussion for another day, but that gives us two audiences now. We have the high school student, and we also are able to use those courses for that intro level secondary student who's just starting college. So we develop courses in food products and processing, biotechnology, agribusiness. We develop courses in plant science, environmental science, natural resources, animal science, and power structures and technical systems, or agricultural engineering, if you will.
Can you tell me a bit about how you involved others in the development of those courses, whether it was those in industry or other teachers and professors?
Certainly. So the first folks we involved was our Cambridge partner, because there was a heavy lift in terms of instructional design that we needed. Another key concept of curriculum development is including the people who will use it. So we had a call for proposals. We paid secondary instructors who were selected about $10,000 to help kind of give us the content that we needed. We also involved college professors in each of the discipline areas to sort of vet the curriculum, so that as these dual enrollment courses lived in perpetuity, they were vetted, and folks felt confident that they had the right level of involvement. So we kind of worked with the educators, we worked with the instructional designers, the software folks, and really the students are the whole point of this thing. So we consider them partners as well.
Mhm. And as you pointed out, it is not necessarily a common discipline for agriculture to be in online courses. What were the student outcomes like for some of these courses?
So you know, each of these areas are very specific in terms of content outcomes, but for students to be able to graduate on time, was a important outcome. So even though COVID was a big hiccup for lots of students, they were able to stay on schedule because of the courses that we developed, and that was kind of one of the main outcomes. We did do some qualitative focus groups with students who took the biotechnology and the plant science and the food science courses, and students were very happy with those courses. There's a lot of engagement and interactivity when you're dealing with these skill-based pieces. You have to a lot of interactivity. We tried to put that in there with the help of Cambridge and their designers, and we found that we were able to reach all of the learning outcomes. All of our students have been successful so far.
Before I turn things back to Ian and the panel, do you have any advice for others who want to develop courses like this, either online courses or those in agriculture?
Yeah, I think some of the panelists already have mentioned one thing, and is there's some high quality curriculum that's out there in terms of open educational resources, OER. And so I would encourage them to look for those, but I think another piece of advice in light of the AI culture we're going into is teachers are necessary. Teachers are even though we had we've developed courses that kind of use some unique theory of microadaptive learning. We still need the teachers for clarification. We still need the teachers for consultation. We still need the teachers for mentorship. And we needed teachers, even though the content's out there, we needed teachers to help us, put that content in the right place. So teachers are still are very needed. And the only other advice I'd give you is get help, and that's what Cambridge did for us. I know all about curriculum development, and I like to think I know about ag education, but there's a lot of work to be done in the middle, and so don't be afraid to ask for help.
Good advice, John. Thanks so much for being here. That's John Ricketts with Tennessee State University. And thanks also to Cambridge University Press for supporting this conversation today. I'm going to hand things back to Ian now.
Thanks, Liz. Appreciate it. And John, thanks to you as well. I'm going to share the results of this poll and remind my panel to come back on screen now. We'll continue our conversation. But in terms of the poll results, most of the responses were strongly agree or somewhat agreed to both of them. I will say that in the Q&A, we did have Lysandra mention that the barriers are more about implementing academic integration. That's where they found the trouble, at least on her campus. Then another comment here from Mark Palmer, which I think is worth raising. Again, back to the point I kind of made earlier, but he makes an interesting comment here I found that students do not know how to use an office suite. They think the default Excel graph is acceptable. They do not know how to make effective use of hyperlinks. I think Mark's point being, hey, some of the basic skills can be missing, even as we today talk about some of those other advanced tech skills and keeping up with what the employers are looking for. So I want to continue now with the panel conversation. I'll invite Lauren, Crucio, and Ian to rejoin me here on screen. I got a couple things I want to get into, but something that I thought, and we've touched upon it a little bit. I just want to kind of put a finer point on it because I thought it was really interesting in a conversation I had with Ian prior to this, is this idea of like, how do you know what's a fad versus what's a really major trend? Obviously, we know something like AI, which is upending so many things as a major trend, but how do you evaluate that when it comes to a new technology or a certain skill? Everyone's saying, you need to know this. Does everyone need to know how to use throwing this out there, sort of a augmented reality set? Probably not. But in some way, just trying to think of how do you think about what those skills need to be, or where technology is taking us, but also trying to put a little sense of, okay, let me take a step back and make sure I evaluate it well. I'm just kind of wondering what your thought process is. And Ian, I'll start with you since you were the first one to kind of point this out. I know it can, without specifics, it'd be hard to talk about, but I'm just kind of wondering, again, how you may evaluate an area, whether it's worth going to when it comes to new tech skills.
Sure, and I'll use the example of autonomous vehicle technology and engaging with companies that are in that space in Southern Arizona and Arizona more broadly is the use case, because there's a lot of disagreement within that particular industry as to when level 5 autonomy will be reached, for example, with respect to long-term freight on the roadways. And so you have to go into the conversations with eyes wide open. And also for a community college, it's important to be engaged with our university partners in that context. So we at Pima Community College are the sole community college in one of the university transportation centers that are funded through the U.S. Department of Transportation. And ours is co-led by USC and California State University, Long Beach, CSULB, and the Metrans organization there. And so with that connection, we are able to learn from the researchers at the university level, really where that trend was going and whether or not engaging with that particular industry full force at this particular point in time was going to have an ROI with respect to program development and enrollment in that program and sustainability of that program down the road. And we learned that was in fact the case. And so we've been engaged with a number of autonomous vehicle technology partners, both here in Southern Arizona and nationally. And out of that work, launched at the community college level, the first autonomous vehicle operations specialist program, where we were starting to train CDL holders the skills that they're going to need to become operators in the autonomous vehicle space through our logistics program, IT program, and applied technology programs. And so that's just one example of how we go into that work. We also have to have a certain degree for an appetite for risk, which means that we are going to carve out a certain percentage of the time to be engaged with employers that are delving into more experimental technologies or technologies that are still within early levels of development, and never go so far in that direction that we're undercutting resources for programs that we know are going to be mainstay and here for a long period of time. Equally, it's important within what I would say are the longstanding programs that we know we're always going to have an offer, such as nursing and allied health, to going back to the faculty question earlier, ensure that our faculty and our deans are also given the time and space to stay abreast with the technology in those long existing fields, because technology is impacting every field. Almost every field now is more or less a technology field. And so it's really important for us to understand the basics of technology has been talked about in the chat and in the conversation, but also the implications of discipline and area-specific technology with respect to these new jobs, or how technology is impacting long existing jobs, but in new ways.
Appreciate that. And Lauren or Crucio, I just don't know if you had a response to this. I know this can be can go in different directions. Obviously, as Ian just pointed out, it really is sort of some ways very discipline specific, though it obviously affects all disciplines, if that makes any sense. Lauren, I would start with you on this.
Yeah, Very few of our employers come to us and say, would you teach this one specific widget that is so specific it's only unique to us? The majority of them come to us and say, listen, we really are interested in ensuring that our workforce has a skill and also has transferable skills that you would imagine, like critical thinking, like ability to communicate, whatever that new technology is they're learning, explain it to other people and be able to learn how to learn, really. And additionally, oftentimes they do ask us, is there a particular to be able to incorporate a particular tool? For us, we really want to understand from them, how is this tool transferable more broadly, not just at your organization, but at others too, so that we get a sense that we are teaching something that is not only going to serve a student for a very limited period of time while they are in a very limited job. So even in our customized training programs where we're working just with one employer, you can count on there being other very transferable skills that are delivered in partnership with that, not just because we think it's a good idea for the student, but it's actually what employers are asking us for because they know it's going to evolve very quickly within their own workforce. So that is typically what we find. What we also are increasingly asking of our partners who turn to us, suggesting that we teach a particular skill is, do you have evidence of what the outcomes are? We're not teaching just for the sake of teaching. Is there an employment outcome tied to this? Are you interested in hiring the folks who come out of it? And generally, we have been really lucky to have a lot of industry partners. Someone asked about intermediaries. We work with an organization called the New York Job CEO Council, who are in it with us, actually working closely to evolve our apprenticeship programs that are embedded within our applied associate degrees as we go, so that if new skills become relevant and others become outdated, the employers are with us evolving the curriculum and it's not a static item. So that's sort of how we think about specific skills.
I appreciate that, Lauren. It's a good overview. And of course, the point of it being not static as we keep on talking about. But as you said, you don't necessarily have employers coming and saying, hey, teach this one thing and then this one thing only. And they want to know. They usually probably have a lot of things that what they want folks to know in terms of tech skills is something that might be most likely transferable. That makes sense. Krusho, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and if I may sort of take a slightly different tack here, I'll speak in terms of our portfolio. So if you look at our portfolio, there are some courses, upskilling opportunities, which are niche. Example being healthcare systems, let's say, intersection of healthcare and engineering. The target audience there is let's say chief medical officers, consulting firms, and so on. So there's only those many across the economy here in the US and globally that we can target. But that doesn't mean that we don't play in that space, right? So that's one example of a niche, if you will. Environment, climate are similarly sort of small. Then there are these sort of explosive, spaces. Every sort of once in a generation, if you will, internet, data, cybersecurity, AI now. And we know, for example, all of the programming that we're putting out in AI, we know in 2 years' time, those same individuals that we've upskilled will have a reason to come back and upskill again in AI. So that's sort of challenging us in really in interesting ways, and keeps us as a higher ed institution wanting to have an impact on working professionals very sort of relevant and at the forefront, so to speak. So, and fascinating time. If I may just take your question quickly in another sort of manner, and that is how, as a sort of somebody with a background in learning sciences and instructional systems, how do I assess technology as it relates to helping people learn?
Mm-hmm.
I think for the first time in my sort of professional grown up life, I'm seeing, looking at AI in particular, sort of chat GPT and derivatives and ecosystems around it, to have a pretty groundbreaking impact on impacting teaching and learning. Just sort of to put plan as thought here, if you were to point the chat GPT environment, not at the internet, but at a textbook, and then you start to sort of bring out of it a cognitive tutor and so on and so forth, that can really start to help all of us here deliver even better than we are presently. So that's an interesting one for us to track.
Yeah, certainly. I've heard a lot about the personalized tutor, having been talking to Saul Kahn at Khan Academy a little bit about this as well. They're really pushing this idea, not necessarily a new one, I should be sure. It's been around for a while, but now it really does seem to be coming to fruition in a way that's at least a lot faster than I expected. in terms of how that tutor can work with students individually. And this to make sure we're talking this not in terms of Sal's perspective, not replacing teachers by any means, just being an assistant in that room. You know, speaking about, we talked about this earlier about sort of bringing some partnerships, working with faculty. You know, each of your institutions has you know, a long track record of thinking about some of these issues about bringing certain relevant skills, technology skills potentially into the classroom with the course design, the curriculum. There are other institutions that may not have thought about this as much. I don't want to say just liberal arts institutions, but a lot of institutions may not have thought as much in terms of how you make that integration happen with the faculty. I just wonder if any of you have any tips for bringing those conversations to the curriculum, bringing those conversations into the course design, making sure those things stay relevant. Again, we talked about it before a little bit. What I think is interesting here, obviously the faculty control that ultimately, and the administration wants to make sure it's careful with how much it's going to be not dictating what those course design would look like or how the curriculum goes. But obviously you want to influence, you want to think about making sure these connections are made. I just, again, for those institutions that may not be as far along as yours in thinking about these things, any tips about that with working with faculty, deans, department chairs about trying to, hey, how do we kind of make sure we're bringing in the right skills that are really relevant to today? I'm going to go with the first person who raises their hand on this one. Oh, I'll go with Ian for this one. They will come with the crucial.
Yeah, I think it's important to really start framing things like technology, alignment to business and industry, and workforce development is not only within the domain of career technical and workforce programming, but ultimately all programming at the institution, whether it's short-term reskilling, upskilling, or the basic degree, is going to be impacted by all of these things. And the competitive landscape with respect to student choice, with learner choice on where they want to go to get their education and training is also a variable. And so academic freedom is also balanced in many ways in this competitive marketplace by academic relevancy and just sheer competition. And so it's really important for faculty to be aware of actually everybody at the institution to be aware of the macro trends with respect to advanced technologies such as AI and how that's impacting teaching, learning, as well as workforce alignment, how demographic changes, particularly in aging population and the birth dearth in the country, is going to impact the nature and the age of the student that we're going to be serving over time and at what scale. And also for industry voice to be brought to the table, not only for the workforce-oriented programs, but for all programs. It's very important for decision makers, faculty, staff, deans to hear, listen, and learn from industry partners, even if they don't necessarily consider themselves an industry-focused area. And that's what we've been working on as well at Pima Community College. And then finally, and Lauren talked about this earlier, and we're on the same trajectory, to have some mechanism of work-based learning in all of our programs of study, including general education, liberal, and fine arts at the institution, because it's important for learners to understand why they're learning what they're learning or what the connectivity of the social sciences class is to their future career goal. And so it gives students agency. It opens and broadens the realm of possibilities for how that learning can be applied in said disciplines. And so that's the direction that we are currently moving. We don't have all of our programs yet with work-based learning, but it is going to be something that we continue to work on with an endpoint goal of 2025 on that.
And I appreciate how you broke that down quickly in terms of both how the landscape has changed and the idea of academic relevancy. Certainly a topic it's really important these days, but the idea that all programs probably have to be thinking about this in a way, though it can be difficult in certain places and having that conversation, but how important that is, not just to integrate these ideas into industry programs or programs that are designed for a specific industry, but really those broader academic programs. Kusho, you were going to add to that as well.
Yeah, so I'll just say in sort of as far as our dean is concerned, given our context of being an engineering school, we have sort of an unfair, I guess, advantage here. He's very much a believer. In fact, yesterday when he kicked off this program that I was mentioning earlier, he spoke about AI, and and this is sort of a nice, quick sort of story he told about the slide rule. And when he was in school, his high school was the first class at least in his city and his high school that adopted the 4-function calculator. literally 4 functions: subtraction, multiplication, addition, and division. Some of the fancy ones had percentage on them, the 5 function, the 5th. But he was, as the point he was making to this group was the following: AI today is where the 4 function calculator was back then. This is this is so explosive that folks who are at the forefront, Google's, Tesla, SpaceX, and so on, they are calling for a little bit of a slowing down or a pause, a 6-month hiatus. And where all of that is coming from is sort of the ethical, as is always the both sort of a double-edged sword in our country. Innovation leads policy, and we're only now catching up to Facebook and Twitter. What about all that AI will challenge us with? And it's really, I think, to finally sort of close that point, Ian, I think higher ed institutions, community colleges, all of us must, I think, one way to make progress is to discuss and communicate and participate in the discourse around technology, its implications, and so on, rather than sort of sitting back. So that's perhaps what I'd close with in response to your question.
I appreciate that example. Lauren, go ahead.
If I could just add to that too, in terms of how to galvanize internally your own teams to want to be a part of this and want to interact with the outside world to make sure that there are relevant skills, the first thing I'd say is don't assume that they don't want to. We did a big survey of our faculty here at CUNY. We got 1,600 replies. 94% of them, faculty members, said they saw it as their jobs to help prepare students for careers. Should not have been surprised, but we're very blown away by that. And even more surprising was the fact that the majority of them wanted to work with industry to actually facilitate those connections, update curriculum. But the challenge is that they've never been trained how to have those conversations with industry. There are no supports currently at scale to help them do that. And so we have launched faculty training programs to help them understand sort of how to integrate career goals and industry feedback into their curriculum. We've also worked towards recognizing that work within our reward system, because right now the ways we incentivize faculty to work, teach, succeed in an academic setting does not necessarily include the integration of careers and working with industry. So there are some structural things that can be done, also sharing data so that they actually understand where students go once they participate in these programs. But I would just say from the start, don't assume, ask your faculty what they think they would need to be able to do this work.
Well, and I appreciate that point, because I think sometimes, and I want to be cautious about stereotyping faculty as being recalcitrant, not interested in these things. Oh, we're stuck in our discipline and we don't necessarily want to think about the wider world. We don't want to just be vocational. But to your point, there are many faculty, it sounded like they were very interested in understand the world, how quickly it's changing. Crucial, certainly, as you brought up about the AI, I think a lot of faculty are very interested in, hey, how do I use it? How do I integrate it in my classroom potentially in a variety of different ways, not just for the learning, but actually into the area and the discipline I'm teaching in. So one way that's certainly cutting across a lot. I do want to get to an audience question here, and we could spend a whole hour talking about competency-based education, which focuses on skills less so than some other aspects of other education. But I do want to get to this question from Mark just to touch on it. He asks, in what ways might competency-based education help us meet workforce needs in technology? Just wondering if anybody there has any thoughts on that. This is obviously an area that's been growing for a while. That is CBE is usually the term. Any thoughts on that in terms of its use within your programs? Have you experimented with it? Have you done a lot with it so far? Any thoughts on that? The silence.
I think it's important to recognize that every credential we issue is at best a rudimentary proxy for a real world skill set. And so the more that we can align to validated industry recognized certifications as maybe a tighter or closer proxy to demonstrated skill sets, and also with respect to assessment and how we do assessment in higher education, ensuring that assessment has real world applicability and relevancy, and that it can be measured both quantitatively and qualitatively where feasible, it is important. I think from a policy perspective, I'm hoping that there's going to be a pivot at a particular point in time where the Carnegie unit, which at essence is based on seat time, really that we nationally have a conversation about that at the policy level and really allow institutions to drive toward more competency-based models. To Lauren's point, I think many faculty would really relish the opportunity to do so. As we've been scaling up our short-term programming, faculty from career tech workforce, but also liberal arts and transfer areas have been coming to the workforce development team wanting to implement these new and different ways of offering their education regimen, because they do see the value to the end user, which is to the learner and the student. So I think that equally, we have to make sure that the industry recognized certifications that we adopt and offer are not adding to the already crowded marketplace of industry recognized certifications that industry doesn't actually recognize. So it's really being dialed in with our industry partners and ensuring that they have validated said credential.
And I appreciate that. And we could probably have we have done before, a whole hour on competency-based education. It's a whole other area. And I think it is fascinating. Its growth, to your point, there are some serious movements within sort of what I would call traditional higher education to question and look at the credit hour as sort of the base unit. But again, a conversation perhaps for another time. We've only got about 5 more minutes here, and I do want to get to this question from an attendee named Bruce. Again, pretty broad one, but I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts would be. And he says, thank you for outlining these themes. What would you expect are the technology opportunities emerging in the next 5 years? So we talked a lot about AI. We've heard about that. I think all of us are inundated every day with new information as we kind of think about it. I'm trying to think of, are there other areas that we're missing? We're not thinking as much about in higher education when it comes to technology opportunities. And what I mean by that, again, is where the curriculum needs to go in order to make sure those skills are being taught, not only to meet the workforce, but also just for broader needs in society. So any thoughts on that in terms of where the opportunities may be in the next 5 years and that you're thinking about, or things that you don't hear as much about that you'd like to hear more about, frankly, and may have questions about equally? Kushal, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I can sort of speak to, and this is more speculative than I think founded in data. Well, clearly, some of the ones, again, Ian had mentioned healthcare, obviously, and the opportunities that we'll have to expand the lifespan, which have sort of become real in many societies already, many economies. That's one. Another one is education. I think by all standards, we have done poorly in terms of teaching and learning in our existing systems, the classroom, if you will. I haven't heard that interview. Bill Gates, I believe, was interviewing Sal Khan. I've heard of the interview, but not heard the interview itself. But there's a lot of promise there, in terms of this notion of mass customized learning. Mass as well as customized. So that's an opportunity. I think, and this gets kind of a little political, but environment and climate clearly is, at least for me, can no longer ignore it. And in fact, something like AI, this wave that is sweeping us, can be a distraction, in my view, to the attention we need to pay, the climate and our environment. I hope there are some solutions that come from AI in that space. So that's another one. Energy, of course, water, and so on and so forth. But again, I think back to the zooming out, and final thought I'll say is, and we've started to sort of in some ways follow the industries. Industries are doing the work of answering exactly this question that has been asked. And our role here is to equip them to do their best work once they identify the niche they want to chase.
Appreciate that, Kushal. Lauren, Ian, any thoughts on this? I'd also ask any final thoughts as we wrap up here, because we got about 2 more minutes to go.
Oh boy, that changes the nature of this answer.
Fair enough. I just switched the deck on you. I hear you.
Just one closing thought on emerging skills and technology. So outside of the realm of learning about AI and learning how to build AI and the important things related to AI, I do think that software engineering generally is going to change. It's in huge demand here in New York City currently, and it is end to end sort of what the demand is. Everything from building algorithms to being able to actually code and program and debug, et cetera. As AI becomes more prevalent, the actual task of building code, like writing lines and lines of code, may go away. And so increasingly other skills like debugging or understanding context, understanding how users use your applications will become more and more important as some of the other things, even within software engineering, become less and less. So even though it is not AI, it does impact the kind of technologies that you might think about focusing on, or the kind of skills in tech that you think about focusing on. In terms of just a general thought about all of this, it is refreshing to know that there are so many people coming at this from different angles across the United States, across our nation and the globe. And even for those of us who do this a lot, I have learned some new areas of emphasis that I really am excited to follow up with the panelists on. So just thank you. This has been really informative.
Lauren, I appreciate those thoughts, and certainly the impact of AI as it develops on other areas of learning and other areas of focus, I think is of academic focus. I think it's an interesting one to think more about. Ian, I know we've got to wrap up here, so I want to give you a chance also to offer some final thoughts and also reflect perhaps on that question I threw out there, which is, again, it's probably an unfair one to throw at you in the last minute or so.
Yeah, I agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said. And so I'll just add a different angle, and that is with the geopolitical landscape and a de-risking emphasis on the part of the United States to friendshore and reshore manufacturing. There's a lot of technology with respect to manufacturing that we're really starting to see escalate in our region. We are an aerospace and defense hub, so perhaps that's a bellwether with respect to larger trends that are going to start happening as we really do start to see manufacturing being brought back to this whole entire hemisphere, which will also add in an element of logistics and supply chain management and related technologies that are also going to really be put back on the front burner. Interestingly, the advances in AI are going to impact all of our jobs, including all of us on this panel in some form or fashion. And so we're starting to see, again, the value of the hard skills that cannot currently be done by a robot, by a machine, or by a computer continue to increase with respect to labor market value there. And so jobs that used to be considered low wage or low skilled are actually starting to be reoriented and pivoted back to being more valuable. And particularly when you start to see how these technologies impact fields we wouldn't normally think of, like building construction technology or HVAC management and energy management. So there's going to be a lot of exciting developments there, and really kind of seeing a reshuffling of what we used to consider to be the traditional hierarchy of jobs, from laborer to professional as a pyramid, and really starting to see an interesting blend or mix of various occupations.
That's really interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's something for us certainly here as journalists to continue to pay attention to, and I'm be really interested to see how that plays out. Well, we are at time. I want to say thank you to all of my panelists, Lauren, Kushro, and Ian, for their time today. I really appreciate it, and I also appreciate the audience for being here. We'll be sending all of you in the audience an email with a link to the recording, as well as articles we cited today. Please do share that email with colleagues if you think it would be valuable information. That email, of course, like I said, has the recording as well. So again, share it with your colleagues if you think it'd be valuable information. I'd like to thank again Cambridge University Press for their support for this session, as well as John Ricketts for his contribution to the conversation. I also want to thank my colleague, Luna La Liberty, for making sure our session ran smoothly behind the scenes today. And again, I want to thank everyone out there in our audience. Really do appreciate your time today, and also for your contributions to the questions and the comments. We do read them all. They do influence how we approach some of these topics, and also set us up for thinking about future sessions, just like this one, or other types of reports we may produce on the topic. I'm Ian Wilhelm for the Chronicle. Be well, everybody.